Hi, thanks everyone for coming on out. Once again, this is Andrew with Collector's Corner and our ONOMATOPOEIA, a Collector's Corner show. And today we are doing a live conversation with Julio. Oh, I just asked you this and I apologize.
No, it's all right.
Pronunciation of your last name again?
Anta, Julio Anta.
Anta, yeah.
Yeah.
I apologize greatly, but
No worries.
the trials and tribulations of a live show. Um, just for the customers that are watching or coming on in, if you are not familiar, he has a brand new comic book called Home coming out from Image Comics next Wednesday. And it is your first published piece outside of some short stories that you did earlier. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. First published work.
Oh, perfect. Yeah. And I had the solicit up and I was going to read it, but I figured maybe people would be more interested to hear your kind of 30-second rundown on the background on this 5-issue miniseries.
Sure. Yeah. 5-issue miniseries titled Home from Image Comics. And it is essentially the story of a young boy who is separated from his mother while seeking asylum at the US-Mexico border. And through the stress and trials and tribulations of that entire process, it sparks emerging superhuman abilities in him. And essentially the rest of the book is what comes next. What happens now when you have an undocumented asylum seeker with superhuman abilities? How does the public react? How does the government react? And what happens to him? What's his story? So that's the elevator pitch.
Yeah, that's perfect. I actually was fortunate enough to, as a retailer, be able to check out the first 4 issues. And I got to say, really drew me in right from the beginning. And not only from the story standpoint, but, the artwork is gorgeous as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so one thing I always like asking creators and publishers is, who do you think actually is like your target audience for this book? Because even though it deals with kind of superpowers, it's definitely not a superhero comic book.
Yeah, yeah, I'm glad you said that because a lot of the early press for the book was, superhero immigrant. And as somebody who's read the book like you know that that's not the case. This is a book that is about survival, about what is home, and about family. But to answer your question about who the book is for, uh, like a lot of writers, part of the advice that, when you're starting off as a writer that you get is to write what you want to read, and a book like Home is a book that, if it was already on the stands, I wouldn't be writing it. It's a book that speaks to issues of identity, of my identity as a Latinx person. But, for me, I wrote this book specifically for the direct market. Because there's nothing like it in the direct market. There's very little representation from Latinx characters to Latinx creators, and that's true for all media. But I think it's especially true in comics. And for me, I wanted to write a story that spoke to an audience that doesn't see those characters very often, and would hopefully allow them to empathize with these characters. And maybe. A little naively, my hope is that it maybe changes some minds from some people who, have not seen this kind of story told in an empathetic way. Maybe they've just watched the news. And my hope is that, people come away with something from this book.
Oh, that's awesome. And I think that a lot of people will. My wife, I let her read some of the stuff as well. And one of the first things that she started wondering is, what kind of experiences were you drawing from? Were they either things that you or family have gone through, or just through stories or through your community?
Mhm.
Because if, like for your short stories, they are very much more, I don't know, rooted in real world, right? And because they're so short, you're able to really just land a punch really hard. And it's very moving, and in such a way that someone that has not had any experience with anything like that, I was born and raised here in Michigan, and I was actually having a similar conversation with my father recently, because when he was a child, actually went through the relocation camps in California due to World War II and us being Japanese heritage. But I've been blessed at growing up in an area that is fairly colorblind, and haven't had to deal with these horrific things. And my wife is Caucasian, so she also hasn't had to deal with these things. But so that was, I guess, getting back to my original point, what she was like, where are you drawing from all this? Because it is stuff that we do see on the news, especially obviously over the past 4 years, right? And you see horrific things, and you hear people on both sides saying a variety of different things. And then, being someone who questions everything, I always wonder where exactly the truth lies, and how horrific some of this stuff is, because from my view, it looks absolutely ridiculously bad.
Yeah. Thanks for reading the short stories. They're definitely more grounded in realism. There's none of the fantasy or superhero tropes that I kind of built into this book. But to my earlier point, I built it in specifically because this is a story I wanted to tell to the direct market. And I thought, what if we just kind of insert this element of superhuman powers? Maybe that'll get more people interested in reading it. Maybe that'll give me a better shot at, doing that naive thing of trying to change other people's minds. And also I think there's some interesting parallels between superhero origin stories and the immigrant experience as well. But to answer your question about where this comes from, so my background is that I was born in Miami. So kind of like you, I didn't grow up experiencing any sort of interpersonal racism that I can remember, at least. There's systemic things, sure, but I was never called any racist name or derogatory term until I left Miami. And my background is that my father was a Cuban refugee, and my mother was born here. Her parents were undocumented immigrants from Colombia. So that is, those are two very different experiences from both sides of my family. One on the Cuban side is a very, probably the most privileged immigration experience from Latin America, where, as Cubans, you were able to come to this country and not have any papers, not have to worry about documentation, and instantly, as long as your feet hit the soil, we're on a path to citizenship. On my mother's side, it was very different. And both of those experiences, while different from each other, are also different from the story of home, which is a Guatemalan boy and his mother coming to the US and asking for asylum. And then because it does take place during the beginning of family separation, they ask for asylum, which is a totally legal process. And then they are treated in an illegal way and in a cruel way, which is they're separated. And the why behind that is deterrence. And it was the administration's way of, obviously, you watch the news, but a way to try to tell the rest of Latin America and the rest of the world trying to, come in through the Mexican border that, the US is quote unquote closed. So for me, because it's such a different story than my family's immigration story, it required a lot of research. So for me, I kind of became obsessed with this when the news broke of family separation. For me, it was one part, feeling betrayed, because
Sure.
I knew that, the experience that my parents had, though very different, they were able to, become citizens, and they were able to have a child in the US who, has been able to live a life that, is the American dream, essentially, And then on the other side, I also saw my father came here as a refugee when he was 3 years old. And at the time in 2018, when this started, I also had a 3-year-old. So I was
Okay.
in these kids that were being separated from their parents. I saw my father and I saw my son also. And I just saw like, not only could this have been, my family, but even if it wasn't people, that look like me coming from the same continent as my family, it's a despicable and cruel situation. And I felt completely helpless while it was happening. I felt like there was nothing I can do about it other than watch the news and, do all this research. At this point, as I reflect back on it, I've kind of realized that all of this research, because I hadn't decided to write a book about this. I hadn't had the idea for the book yet. I was just like, I was reading every article I could find about it. I was watching interviews, listening to interviews with families who had no idea where their children were because children were essentially separated and then shipped off to some other part of the country to some, foster home or shelter. And, in hindsight, I realized that it was kind of a way for me to cope with all these feelings, getting obsessed with it essentially. And then when I had the idea to make this comic, it felt like I found a way to, a positive way to put these feelings into. And that's essentially how the book came to be and, where it came from.
Oh, that's great. Well, that was probably a weird way to comment on that. You know what I mean? I think so.
Yeah,
Um,
it's funny when I send people the book, I always have this like urge to say like, I hope you enjoy it, because that's what I'd say with any of my other books. But it just feels wrong, because it's not, I don't think anybody walks away from reading the book and feels, good about it.
right. Well, yeah. It's. I mean, being a father myself, I mean, I just can't even fathom the idea of having my family separated. Um, uh, for any reason, let
Yeah.
alone for something where your life is already in shambles and you're trying to go someplace that supposedly is going to offer help. And in this scenario where your characters in home have a plan, like there's
Hmm.
stuff set up, and yet they are still unable to have that plan work. And they're attempting to do things properly. Um, and even in the one of the short stories you wrote, you touched on that as well with the father and son sitting on the beach. That
Yeah.
one, out of all the stuff that I've read that you've done, is absolutely my favorite piece.
Oh, thank you.
Because oh, absolutely. Because it asks questions that seem very, very reasonable questions to ask, and also the son gives a viewpoint where I could see people legitimately having these kind of reactions. And
Hmm.
so it felt very real, but it also was so informative. And from the father's standpoint, so let's be human to people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these aren't people that are a threat, right? And uh, it was just so moving. I really,
Thank you.
really, that piece just said a lot to me. And if anyone watching is curious, he has these short stories all up on his website, um, that he just has up free to be able to view. So definitely check that out. And I don't have the site address. What?
Yeah, it's just my name. It's julioanta.com. The show the or the short story that you were referring to is called Balseros. If you guys want to check that one out, but I have 5 short stories up on my website that you can just read for free.
Yeah, and I recommend it to anyone that's watching this. Check it out; they're great reads. But like I said, they pack a punch, and I think that's great for, when you have a short story, you really got to make every word count, and
Yeah,
you do so very successfully. Um,
thank you.
yeah. So I mean, you did kind of touch on this earlier, but I wanted to ask if there was more of a reason than just trying to reach a wider audience for the superhero lens, um,
Hmm.
because like I said, this is definitely very timely, right? It's a part of our society that is being having a spotlight shown on,
Hmm.
especially over the past 4 years. Um, and it very well could have been more like your short stories, or a drama piece that's very heavy. Um, and I think that by doing this, you've managed to make it a much more accessible piece. But was that the only thought process behind that?
That was part of it. My from what obviously from what you read, my instinct is not to, put any, fantastic elements into my stories. My instinct is to always keep it grounded in reality. And I think that this book, with the exception of the superhuman abilities, is still grounded. Everything that all of the instances that you see in the first issue are based off of real things that have happened. I would say everything in this book is real, with the exception of the superhuman abilities. It's
Sure.
all based off of real stories. Um, but no, I would say maybe 50% of the reason why I put in the superhuman abilities was to reach a larger audience and to make it more accessible to people. But the other part of it also is what I mentioned earlier, which is the parallels of the immigrant story and superhero origin stories, and the abilities that I gave him, which we in the solicitation we say, so it's not a spoiler, but it's this uncontrollable energy that comes out of him.
Sure.
And for me, that was because he is in a situation where he has absolutely zero control. This is a 10-year-old boy who, it wasn't his choice to come to the US in the first place. The situations that led for his mother to realize that she had to take him out of his community was also not under his control. And the separation from his mother also isn't under his control. So these abilities were meant to show just how out of control he is. And then as the series goes on and we see him kind of learn to hone in on these, also find himself and find some peace in himself, we see those powers become much more controlled. But I would say, to answer your question, it's twofold. It was one, accessibility, and then also to have that conversation that I think we saw in a lot of we saw in Superman, obviously, um, where we're having that conversation about the immigrant experience through a superhero lens, that I really don't think we see very often, even in modern day portrayals of Superman.
Sure.
So it was my way of trying to add to that conversation as well.
That's great. I think one of the differences there for Superman is at the end of the day, he looks Caucasian, right?
Hmm.
So even though he's an immigrant,
Yeah.
you're not dealing with any of those types of issues.
Hmm.
Um, so you said something earlier that struck me, that that when I was talking about target audiences. Um, so one of the things, and this is industry wide, that they're trying to figure out, because so many times when a character is put in, it sometimes feels like here's the Latino character, or here's a gay character, or
Hmm.
whatever. Insert whatever minority group you want, but it doesn't feel like that character is representative of that culture or
Yeah.
that group. Um, and reading this, one of the things that stuck out to me was uh, just even language on how you pull in. Because, I mean, part of it is for readers, your average reader is going to be English speaking only.
Hmm.
Uh, and so doing the translated in Spanish kind of thing is, the normal. But you didn't do that, which I think really allowed me, even though I may not know what this word or that word meant, um, it really allowed me to be drawn into the world, into the story
Mhm.
more. And it's not that you had a whole lot in there. Um, but are there characters, I guess my point, I'm wandering off, but are there characters that you see in comic books right now that really speak to you from your culture or your heritage? Um,
Mhm. You know, the honest answer is no. You know, I really love the Miles Morales character. I really enjoy the way he's being written now, um, as well. But you know, the point that you made earlier about how, you know, it feels like this is just like the Black Superman or the Latino Spider-Man, or and it doesn't really actually feel representative. I think there's two reasons. One, these characters are usually not written by people of that culture or heritage. You know, I mentioned enjoying the current run of Miles Morales. It's still not written by, you know, a Latinx person. Wasn't created. It was created by a white guy, by Brian
yeah,
Michael
Brian Michael
Bendis.
Bendis.
Which I think Miles is one of the few characters that are, you know, of some sort of racial or ethnic minority that are written by a white person, that actually works. Because I think that his character does work. I think especially now, and I really do enjoy the current run. But I think that's one part of it. Usually, they're not actually written by people, you know, representative of that character. And the other part is that usually it's just, you know, the Black Superman, the Latino Spider-Man. It's not, you
Right.
know, very rarely does Marvel or DC introduce these new characters that are by their origin story, by, you know, their history, characters that are this, you know, whatever racial group it is. It's usually something that's retconned, or, you know, a version of an existing character. So that's why I like when they do introduce characters like America Chavez, or I can't think of any others right now, who were introduced, you know, as, you know, a Latinx character. But I also think there's really exciting things happening. My friend, fellow creator Terry Blas, he's doing a book for Marvel of the Reptile character, who's a Mexican American character. And I really
Out
do
of
like when
Amazing Spider-Man, right?
I think it was it might have been originally from there, but I think there's like an Avengers Academy book that is really the one that he was featured in the most,
Yeah,
something
that's right.
like that. But I do appreciate when they take these characters that maybe were, you know, a bit of an afterthought when they were first created, and then give it to somebody like Terry, who is Mexican American, and let him define the character and who the character actually is in his own solo series. So I think things like that are really helpful, and are the right way forward. But I think what you're speaking to is the way that it's pretty much been done in big two comics, which is just like, you know, let's throw a bone to, you know, the Black community or the Asian community and kind
Right.
of give them their version of this pre-existing character. Which I think, you know, I'm sure it does some good, but I feel like it pisses off, you know, close-minded people who are fans of, you know, the original character. And it doesn't really give a substantive, you know, character and personality to, you know, this new character. So I'm hoping that we start seeing, you know, the big two move away from that and move more into, you know, real lived-in characters by people who are representative of them.
Yeah, and I think what you said earlier speaks to that in hiring creative teams that are actually from different backgrounds that are able to
Mhm.
draw from personal experiences, or like I said, even something as small as the way people talk can absolutely draw you into something and make it feel
Mhm.
real. I had this conversation with a virtual group that we did last year about Black Panther, the film,
Mhm.
and how that movie, from someone that was has never been a part of the Black community, it felt authentic to me, even though it was about a place called Wakanda that doesn't exist, obviously, but it felt like it was a real embodiment of a group of people, which was just brilliant for me watching from the outside.
Yeah, and I think with Black Panther, and obviously Black Panther has been around, from the early days of Marvel. But he's a character that was his own character, and he was not a version of any other character. And I think especially with the Black Panther movie, kind of taking, all the world building that Ta-Nehisi Coates did in his Black Panther run, and put it into this film where the characters are from, a place in that universe. I think that's a big thing too, because usually we just see these characters, in the US, which is, like the typical Marvel setting, right? So like we see, I think America Chavez is an interesting one because she's from another dimension. But, we see her, we see Miles in the US, and obviously, Miles is a, biracial kid born in the US. But very rarely do we see characters like Black Panther who have a country of origin, and we see that country of origin, we see them living in it, and we see this big real world and a culture surrounding that country. I don't think there's any other character in the big two, or Marvel at least, where we spend time in their home country, and see what that world and that culture is like, and how it influences them, and how they act in the broader Marvel big two world.
Yeah, I think for such a long time, the thought process behind it was we need to show people what they can associate with or recognize, as opposed to let's tell stories for people that may broaden their mind. And I think where it's shifting now, especially with companies like Image that are publishing a lot of creator-owned or self-contained stories, as opposed to here's a character that's been around for 75, 80 years.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Let's see. My friend Jeff is actually talking in the chat there. He's having an issue with his connection, but he says the series is a fierce metaphor on several levels: alienation in all of its myriad forms, isolationism, both COVID inspired for the people who are whiny about not having their favorite restaurants open, when very real isolation of depression beckons, and then post separation of human contact, either accidentally or physically, in a very tangible ways. It also powerful set of observations on the confusion of puberty and self-awareness. And he actually says that he puts it on par with Mao's in many ways, and he means that in the largest compliment. And
Yeah, wow, thank
having
you.
read Mao's, that is definitely, I think, a huge compliment.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Yeah. So one of the things that I actually sent you a question ahead of time, because of everything that I've read of yours that speaks of heritage and tradition and respect and all of that. And because it means a lot to me as well. Do you have any sort of traditions or things from that culture that you think should be either embraced or just things that you want to continue, that you're going to pass on to your son, um, or even more importantly, maybe even brought to the attention of other people? Because America, even though it may not have seemed like this for the past few years, is a melting pot. It is a place for people to come together to experience other cultures, to share and enrich other people's lives, as well as our own. And not to get on a soapbox there, but
No,
do
I
you have
agree. I
anything?
agree. Yeah, I think there's a tradition of, I think with most people, but a tradition of storytelling, in my culture that I think is important to, get all of these stories, most of them, just orally passed down from generation to generation, about our migration stories. My family, on one side is Cuban, but originates originally from Spain. And then on the other side is Colombian. And there's a whole part of that history that I'll probably never know. But it's a mixture of indigenous, of Asian culture. It's a lot. And I think that it's important for us to preserve these stories. When I speak to my grandmother and I hear, I learn a new story almost every conversation I have with her, that I had no idea about. And I think it's important to pass down those stories because, I was born in this country. My son obviously was born in this country. He's not going to know the struggles that my grandmother had as an undocumented woman, as a single mother. And I think it's important, for perspective, for respect, for, knowing where we came from. I think it's important to, pass down these stories. And I think a common kind of thread through all of my stories is a sense of justice also. And I think that's also a part of our culture. And I think of most cultures, and the importance of, finding ways to make our lives better. I mean, that's really the reason why most of our families, ended up here in the first place. And most of the reasons why anybody migrates anywhere, it's usually for, some sort of better life, whether it's to be with people you love or for different opportunities. I think those are definitely things that I'm passing down.
Yeah, that's awesome too. It's yeah, stories are so integral to my life and music that I guess yeah, I wouldn't even have come up with that because it's just so much a part of my daily life that
Yeah.
I guess I overlook a lot of that type of thing. But that's huge. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, definitely.
Very cool. So let me see. My friend Daniel, um, who is having to work, his question for you was, there's a lot of passion evident in the story. What was your process and journey for pitching this story specifically to Image? And
Sure.
why did you feel that this was the right place to tell your story? I mean, obviously, Marvel and DC or things like that are a different boat, but
Yeah.
these days there's so many different places,
Hmm.
whether it's even Dark Horse still being around or Vault,
Hmm.
Scout, Aftershock, so on and so forth.
Yeah. Why Image? Obviously, they're the biggest creator-owned publisher around. So, it was, and they publish, my favorite creators, most of my favorite comics. So when I decided to write my first series, as opposed to just short stories, they were obviously at the top of my list, but it was kind of a dream to, have Image publish the book. I didn't think it would happen. But they were, I think like most people who are writing their own books, they're at the top of the list. Aside from being the biggest, I think they're also a publisher that, excuse me, that allows creators to tell the stories that they want to tell. And I think that they have a history of that. A book like Infidel, I'm not sure if you're familiar, that was a huge
Oh yeah.
influence on me kind of seeing like, okay, Image allows a book like this that I don't think many other creator-owned publishers would have put out, especially at the time. And it's a book that has something to say that's important, and it doesn't really hold back or pull any punches in telling it,
Yeah.
which is what I wanted to do with my book. I think based off of what you've read, I hope that you see that too. At least, it's not a book that pulls away in the difficult moments. I try to walk this line of not leaning into the melodramatic aspects of it, but staying there long enough for the reader to feel these emotions that the characters are going through. And Infidel was one of those books that I kind of aspired to when I read it. So Image has always been, the publisher that if I could have, picked who I wanted, they were always number one. And I'm lucky that it happened. But I guess the question was also what the journey was to get there. So when I had the idea for Home, which is, kind of, I would say probably the summer of 2018, family separation started in the spring. I hadn't written any comics yet. I was just a comic book reader, and I think like most readers at some point, we all think like, we could write this. We could probably figure this out. We can probably do this, but I'd never actually tried to do it at the point that I had the idea for Home. And, I think most creators, when they start off, it's because they want to tell, whatever this most important thing is to them, whatever that most important story is. And oftentimes it's like this magnum opus, this dream of a 100-issue run or, a trilogy of graphic novels or whatever. And for me, it was this 5-issue miniseries. But I also knew, just based off of being a reader, following other creators on social media, that's not the way to start as a comic book writer. I couldn't go up to Image and just say like, hey, I'm this guy you've never heard of who has never done anything, but please put out my 5-issue miniseries, about a topic that is, unfortunately controversial, and quote unquote political.
Right.
But so, essentially I knew that I couldn't just do that. Right. So I had the idea for Home. And I had read Ed Brisson, the writer, he had posted on Twitter that the best advice that he has for new creators is to do short stories and to just get them out there, any way that they can, whether that's anthologies or just putting them up online for free. So that's what I did. And that's how I ended up with those 5 short stories that are on my website right now. The first one was a 10-page short story called Sincerely Agent Mejia. And that's about a Mexican-American ICE agent and, kind of his journey of dealing with what he does as his job contrasted with his heritage and his family story.
I really like the aspect of that one because it was flipped from the normal view of that story, right? Because normally it's the people that are I don't want to use the term victim, I guess, because that's not the right term, but the people that are being negatively impacted by the police. And then to see that from the flip side, though, was a really, I thought, great way to tell a different side of a coin, I guess.
Thanks. Yeah. That story pretty much sprung out from me finding out that over 50% of ICE agents are Latino. And there's a whole other conversation we can have about the diversity of views and culture in this community, because it is a community that spans the Caribbean, South America, Central America, Mexico, not to mention various stages of migration and generations. So this that story stemmed from me learning that fact and me thinking, okay, what would it feel like if you were somebody who worked for ICE, who was Mexican American, who wasn't involved in deportations? Most people don't know, but pre-Trump, ICE was an organization that did a lot of work against child trafficking and human trafficking. They also were the people who deported undocumented immigrants, but that was not all the work that they did. And this was a story about a man who, he thought that he did a good thing for a living. He tracked down, essentially children that were smuggled for sexual purposes and essentially liberated them. But then with the new administration, that whole wing of ICE was essentially pushed to the side and everybody was on deportations. Which was something that he struggles with as a character. So it was kind of an exploration of that. But essentially, I started working on all these short stories, and learning what it was like to write comics, learning what it was like to collaborate with artists, um, and um, and I did that at first just to, hone the craft, and also, it was all in service of home, which is what I wanted to do, in service of being able to go to a publisher and say, "Here's my past work. I can show you that I know I can do the job, and I have, at least a bit of a track record." So essentially, in 2019, I put out 3 of those short stories throughout the year while working on the pitch for home. And during that time, it was a lot of, like researching what is it like to how does a publisher, a creator-owned publisher, pick up a book?
Right.
How do you get in touch with an editor? What does a pitch look like? How do you get it in their hands? So it was a lot of that. And then finally, when I, kind of answered all those questions for myself and learned what it was like to create a pitch, um, I found the artist, Anta, who's the artist on the book, found Brian Valenza, the colorist, and Hassan Otsmain Allahu, the letterer, and put together this pitch that, kind of taking all of, all that I've learned, and tried to put together the most, professional and appealing pitch that we could, for a publisher. And then I went to New York Comic Con in 2019, and tried to just cold pitch editors at their booths, which was an interesting experience, because a lot of people, they're not interested in that, and just some random guy coming up to them and telling them, a story. Sorry if it's a little loud. There's like, I think motorcycles driving by my building right now. But I got some interesting feedback from some publishers, some editors at publishers. Some thought that it was too political. Some were interested in it. And essentially, I pitched a woman who's an editor at one of Image's imprints, and she didn't think that it was the right fit for their particular imprint. But she liked it a lot, and believed in what we were trying to do with that book, and essentially got the pitch into the hands of Image Central, the main publishing company, and it took a while, but eventually it worked out, and they were able to publish the book. So I wouldn't have been able to guess that they'd be the ones to put it out. That was just like a dream. But it's worked out, and it's been great. And what I said before about them being a publisher that allows you to do what you want to do, like they had literally, there was no point in the process where they, asked me to change anything or not to go down a certain road in the story. They let me tell the story that I wanted to tell with my, collaborators, and it's been great. I'm excited for people to finally get it in their hands now.
That's very cool. Yeah, Daniel is a gentleman that I met ages and ages ago, and he has actually been trying to do his own comic as well about a
Cool.
superhero octopus. And he actually just got his newest issue that he's been self-publishing. In his own hands, and we're going to be getting out for sale here very shortly. But
Very
yeah,
cool.
so that's why he's definitely asking that question, because
Yeah.
always aspiring for more, which is really cool. And
Yeah.
it's intriguing to see that you are able to get that in. I mean, I think it's a testament to your passion and your ability to bring forth something that's really engaging to people, with having 5 short stories and then being able to be picked up by Image. That's awesome.
Yeah, thanks. And for anybody who is interested in writing comics, I've said this before in other interviews, but Alex Segura, the writer, he teaches a pitching class on lit reactors called Splash Page, I think. That was
Very
super
cool.
helpful for me, and it's pretty much how I learned to build the pitch that Image eventually picked up. So I'd recommend it to anybody. It's an online class that you can take.
Okay, awesome. I'll be sure to pass that along to Daniel as well. Um, Jeff did leave a question over here. I guess he is having issues with his technical side, but he said, will the arc of the story allow more secondary characters to experience a form of awakening or developmental empathy along the way, and will that be born of genuine care or fear? So I think he's actually only been able to get a preview of the first issue, and so
Mm-hmm.
maybe that is maybe something that you don't want to answer directly, but
Yeah, no, I'll say, the story centers around Juan, the boy, and his family, essentially. So we do spend time with secondary characters, which are family members of his. And, we hear their diverse, views of what should you do if you are, a kid with or any person with superhuman abilities. How should you use those? Should you use them for good, or should you try to hide? Um, for fear of being exploited, or any other reason. But I would say that we do spend some time, whether it's characters that are not from the family and learning to empathize with them. That's kind of an open question at a certain point in the book. So I'll leave it at that. I think at the core of the book is you know, taking this, highly politicized topic and issue, and really kind of drilling down into what is it like for this child who is actually the most affected by it and who has the least amount of input and agency in the situation. So I'd say the story is 100%. It's his book, but we do see other secondary characters in it.
yeah, yeah, very cool. One of the things, again, I think it's the little details to me that draw me into a story at any given point. And one at one point, I don't remember what issue it's in, but it's it's not like ever super cut and dry. I guess without giving any
Mm,
spoilers away, it's something where the characters feel like they have a reaction where they could go one way or the other, uh, and it's not clear cut to say, "Oh, I'm going to, you know, be a hero," or whatever.
mhm.
I'm being purposely ambiguous. I apologize,
Yeah.
but it felt real because the decision just wasn't black and white. It's not
Mhm.
obviously I should do this thing, and let's say he gets his power and I want to become a hero or whatever, right? I mean, and
Yeah.
that's real, and that really I think helps a lot to draw people into a story. So I'm really
Yeah, definitely.
excited for people to check that part out.
Yeah, yeah, and I would say also, it's like you said, it is that real thing, but also kind of bringing it back to, my love of comics and, playing off of some of the things that we see in comics. It's kind of like, there's Professor X and there's Magneto, and these are two different extremes, and I wouldn't say that we see those total extremes in my book, but there is that conversation about, should we fight back, or should we try to hide ourselves? And those are two things that I think some people will land on either side of different characters on this book when they read it. And I'm not trying to tell the reader which side is the best, which argument is the better argument. That's for the reader to decide, but it is an active conversation that happens throughout the issues of the book.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's an aspect of a good writer is you don't want to be necessarily force feeding, right?
Mhm.
So and it's just neat for the journey too. So
Definitely.
so you love comic books. What kind of things are you reading? Not necessarily, like Miles or whatnot, but do you have
Sure.
any recommendations for people that things that you're finding engaging for whatever reason, whether it's pure
Mm,
entertainment or something
sure.
that moves you or whatever?
Yeah. So right now I'm reading Lost Soldiers. It was an Image miniseries. I think it ended a few months ago, but I hadn't actually been able to start reading it until now. I think the trade just came out, but it's by Alice Coate is the writer, and I really enjoy all of his writing. It's really another example of Image letting people do books that are political, and I think his are more. I would say that my book, people would call it political. I don't, I agree that that's what people would say, but I don't think that it's something that should be political. But I think his books are pretty cut and dry political books that I really enjoy. Um, so I've been reading that. I also just did a reread of That Texas Blood, which is written by my friend Chris Condone. Jacob Phillips is the artist on it. That's a really cool, crime comic that I've enjoyed a lot. I'm about to start writing my first nonfiction graphic novel. So I've been reading a lot of nonfiction graphic novels, particularly The Black Panther Party is a new graphic novel that came out from 10 Speed Press. It's by, I have it here actually, David Walker is the writer on it. And he did Bitterroot as well, I think. But it's a really cool, I think like just under 200 pages, history of the Black Panther Party.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's really cool, especially, people who saw Judas and the Black Messiah, the new movie that just came out about the Black Panthers. This is a really good way to kind of dive into the history and learn more. Trying to think what else, what I've been reading lately. I don't know. I've been, this is a really good comic that I've been reading lately, Shadow Doctor
Ah,
from
Aftershock.
Aftershock.
Yeah, that one
Yeah,
is a total surprise for me. But because had I not known that it was actually based on a true story,
I wouldn't
that I
believe
would
it.
have. Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can't
Yeah,
make that stuff up. Unreal. I agree.
yeah, yeah. So that's really cool. Been enjoying that. I have like my reading pile here, but a lot of it, it's been a lot. I've been doing a lot of research for this new book I'm doing, which I think the publisher will be announcing pretty soon. But I can't necessarily talk in detail about it. But yeah. So those are some of the things I've been reading. I'm excited for the new Reckless book uh,
Yes,
from Brubaker and Phillips. Big
Phillips.
fan of their work. Excited for the new Criminal deluxe editions that are going to be coming out. Um, yeah, I'm trying to think. I've been reading Paper Girls for the first time,
Oh, Brian K. Vaughan
which
is just
mhm,
crazy. He's one of my favorite modern comic writers. Just
yeah.
everything Private Eye, I thought was absolutely brilliant too. If you
Mm,
haven't ever
I
gotten a
have
chance
that. I
to check
haven't
it
read
out.
it yet though. Oh, that reminds me of Panel Syndicate. Friday, Brubaker and uh, Marcus Mentine, I think his name is the artist. They have their web series. The newest issue just came out. I've been really enjoying that book. It's like a YA private eye book, which has been really fun.
Oh, very cool. Very cool.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one. I'll have to check it out.
yeah, definitely. It's on Panel Syndicate, Brian K. Vaughan's like online comics website.
Yeah, I ran across that a while back because he did originally the only Walking Dead comic book that was not written by Robert
Yeah,
Kirkman.
yeah,
And
the
so
alien.
I had to check that out. But yeah. So very, very good recommendations. I appreciate that
Thanks.
all. Um, so I apologize that we didn't have anyone to come on live with us to talk. One of the things that uh, I want to try and do is whenever we have a creator that we have on with us, is to kind of try and give some of my regular customers or even someone brand new off the street a chance to have almost a convention experience, right? Come up to the creator and talk to them.
Yeah,
And so I'm going to continue doing that. But for both Jeff and Daniel, I want to make sure I get them free copies of your book signed for throwing us some questions.
definitely.
And prior to this, you also agreed to do some signing for us for a few other books, so we'll get them up on our site. If you're interested, just be sure to send us a direct message, any customers here. And we do currently have both cover A and B
Cool.
for home number 1 available on our site for pre-order, which comes out next Wednesday. And who are the cover artists? Are they both done by?
So Lisa Sturld is cover A, and Jacoby Salcedo, who is he's cover B. He's a frequent collaborator of mine. He did Balceros, the mini comic you referenced. He also did The Price of Freedom and Between Two Worlds. So he's done 3 of the 5 mini comics with me, and I already wrote it. He's in the midst of drawing a graphic novel that a YA graphic novel for HarperCollins called Frontera. So he's somebody that, no matter what I do, I kind of find, he's got to do something on a book if I'm on it. So he's doing covers for every issue. So every single issue of Home will have a cover B by Jacoby. So if you like the first one, which I really love his number 1 cover, they're all really great. Number 5, I think, is my favorite. Once that is put out there, his number 5 covers is really, really great.
Oh, excellent. I can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, we are running up on the hour mark here, so I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to join us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. So once again, it is available on our website. Home number 1 from Image Comics comes out on the 14th, so next Wednesday. And then once monthly for the next 5 months. And then the YA book you said is going to be out in 2022. Is that correct?
23.
23. Okay.
Yeah, book market works, with I think we're going to be done with it a year before it'll come out. And that's kind of like their traditional marketing period. So very different from a place like Image, but yeah, so we're really excited.
Oh, excellent. I can't wait to check it out. I'm a huge fan of your work now.
Thank you.
And yeah, very moving stuff. Once again, you can find him online. His name on, I think it's Twitter and your website and Instagram and all that fun stuff. And other than that, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thanks for the questions, and we'll see you all soon.
Bye, guys. Thank you.